Today I'm going to try to draw this tower in Tallinn, Estonia, and I told you the towers were coming, and the towers are here to stay. This one is called the Nuns Tower, and it connects to the monastery gate at the bottom left here. The tower was built in the 14th century and was used at different points in history, first as a turret, then a gunpowder warehouse, and finally a place to store grain. According to the internet, this is just one of Tallinn's 26 defensive towers along its well-preserved 13th century wall. And that concludes the medieval history portion of today's video. Now we'll begin the portion where I talk about my history with the city. And we'll draw a little too. But before that, I would like to mention the light in this video. It's volatile, it's sometimes distracting, and it's a pain in my neck. So please hold back your comments of dissatisfaction because I'm right there with you. Instead, let me know what you think about beverages. Please comment your favorite beverage below. Mine's probably coffee or water. I'm dying to hear yours. Yeah, so anyway, I've done my best to mitigate the back and forth lighting, even going so far as to cut up the reference video to make it match the drawing video, which hopefully you won't notice, but whatever. I did the best I could. It's far from perfect, but it's a hell of a lot better than what it was. I may not be a fan of the way this one looks, but had the left and right sides of this video been at war for the entire runtime, one side dark, the other side light, well, you probably wouldn't be seeing this if that was the case. So I'm glad I found a workaround, but it's obviously still pretty erratic, so I'm sorry for that in advance. Okay, so the first time I came to Tallinn was in the fall of 2018. It was the first year my wife and I were living abroad, and it was a time to spread our wings as we just recently sold the van we were living in. If you missed that story, it's somewhere behind us. In a previous video, I can't possibly remember, so honestly, go back and watch them all and you'll find it eventually. Seriously though, one of the nice parts about these videos is that the drawings aren't always the center of attention, so you'll never know what you'll get. In that video, I talked all about my history of travel and how I got here, traveling full-time. Some others are all about the process. We go on lots of little tangents, and I try to make sure that each video has something novel or intriguing about it, which means going back to watch old videos isn't just to see my slightly worse drawing skills. So yeah, if you've missed any key parts of the ever unfolding story, don't hesitate to work backward. And please, if you enjoy the series, go ahead and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. Right, so anyway, the first stop on our first year abroad was England, which we explored for 3 months, followed by Portugal, Hungary, a wild time in Romania, which I hope I get the chance to discuss in a future video, Montenegro, Croatia, and finally Estonia. I'd experienced none of these places prior to our arrival and had in fact never even set foot in continental Europe. My only experience of Europe had been a week in Iceland in 2014 for our wedding, but that's also a story for another day. During that year, my eyes were opened in a myriad of ways. Coming from the States, practically everything is different in Europe. Having experienced it for a few years now, I realize it's not all sunshine and rainbows, but at the time, an entirely new way of life opened up for me, and I jumped right in. I was eager to see as much of this part of the world as I possibly could, but also, pertinently, I noticed a growing fondness for specific places, ones to which I very much wanted to return. I've been fortunate enough to get back to all of the countries of that year, but none has had such a lasting impact on me as Tallinn. Many people have asked us, dozens of people, why we originally came to Tallinn. No one in our family knew much about it. Most of them didn't even know it existed. People would ask why we would come here when we could go there, Spain, Italy, whatever. What about it keeps pulling us back? They're good questions, and I understand where the curiosity comes from. Even some of the people we've met here, who live here, and who have lived here all their lives, don't get it. Of all the places we've been, this is the place we choose to revisit. But hopefully, through this series, I can offer a taste of what Tallinn, among other places, has to offer, and why we've chosen time and time again to come back. These references, the scenes and subjects I've chosen and will choose to draw, are standard, just run-of-the-mill parts of everyday life here. This tower, for instance, stands over a park full of, well, today, picnicking families. Directly below sits a road for pedestrians and the odd car heading in and out of the old town. I didn't pay to get in here. It's no secret garden. It's just a regular day walking around town. It's a beautiful, charming fairy tale place that's had a tough history, but has a more than promising future. Of the 50 or so countries to which I've traveled, usually staying for about a month, give or take a few days, this city sits comfortably among my top 5. And I'd say it shows based on how many times I've returned. I really do love being here. Anyway, after that initial month, nearly 7 years ago, we have been back 4 times for what will total up to over 7 months. And this time we'll be here for about 2 months. If all goes to plan, there are a handful of small trips we'd like to take, hopefully a long-ish road trip up north, as well as some small day trips here and there. Ironically enough, even though we love it here, we've never spent any time outside of the city, which is unusual, but maybe it also says something about just how much we love it here. We've already had a nice long day with one of our good friends. We're hitting all of our favorite spots one by one, and I think we've fallen into a comfortable day-to-day groove already. Traveling with such frequency can make things like these difficult to come by, especially the friendships. So whenever we have the opportunity, we try our best to make time for Tallinn. There are a few other countries that feel similar in that way, where we have good friends that we rarely see. And returning is a priority, but not all of them are easy to get to or budget friendly enough to stay for long. For instance, we have loads of friends in England, which is simple to get to, but it's tough to comfortably live there with regard to finances, especially in London. On the flip side, a place like Tallinn, where we also have friends, is similarly simple to get to and aligns with our budget, which is probably a big reason why we revisit so often. Anyway, I could write a book about Tallinn, so I'll spare you any more for now. I'm sure I'll have plenty more to talk about from this trip anyway, which I'll try my best to drip feed you throughout the coming weeks. For now, though, let's spend some time talking about what's going on with the drawing. As you can see, and like I mentioned in yesterday's video, I'm using this new pen in a significantly different way. The ballpoint never let me make such small marks and little dots like this, so unlocking that capability feels like a big step up. By using some sometimes tiny marks, unnoticeable for all intents and purposes, I can plot points more precisely, and I can do so for a wider array of subjects. I can give myself a better idea of where certain things should sit or connect on the paper, and those marks are so infinitesimal that they ultimately blend into the final product, which is something I could never do with a ballpoint pen. What's more, I can go about the entire process through this approach, and that's what I do here, which will result in a light but implicitly textural drawing. The paper helps with that as well. Not to spoil anything, but I really like where I take this one, and I'm excited for you to see it. I'm glad I've chosen this drawing and yesterday's drawing as my transition into using this pen, because while it looks like there's a lot going on in these references, they're actually simpler than they seem. I talked about yesterday's reference, yesterday, as you do, but today's reference with the tower and wall, the trees, the foreground foliage, and that line of buildings, it actually comes together in a pretty straightforward manner. The tower itself is a tall cylinder with a cone on top. I don't spend any time really shading this one. I keep it incredibly simple. So the cylindrical shape comes from the perspective more than anything. And I suggest that by arching those higher up lines and windows, as well as the stone texture. And as for that texture, it gets more and more parallel to the ground the closer it gets to my eye line. So that takes care of the tower. The wall is at an angle, closest to me on the left side of frame, moving further away as it moves to the center, so it shrinks as it goes right. Other than that, and the texture, which I carry over from the tower, it's a simple part of the scene. As for the foliage, I keep it really straightforward and just detailed enough to be present. Had I spent a lot more time shading everything else in, like the tower and all the rest of the scene, I would definitely have spent a lot more time on these bushes and the tree, but I think they end up working well with the rest of the drawing. Finally, the buildings on the bottom right, I pretty much ignore. I found myself liking certain bits and pieces of what I was drawing today, and I was careful not to squander that. So the buildings become this one small building that's sat up against the tower, and the rest are left as empty space. The large tree is also mostly negative space, which I did to emphasize the texture of the tower on the wall. I didn't want those, which to me make up the primary and secondary components of the reference, to get lost in an otherwise messy, scribbly scene on the paper. This drawing, like yesterday's, is minimal in its execution, which I think elevates it past most of my previous drawings. I'm really curious to see what you think by the end. One last thing I'd like to talk about today is kind of a broad rhetorical question about inspiration. During my time away from the camera, when I practice drawing just for the sake of it, I spend a not insignificant amount of time watching videos, usually walkthroughs or tutorials, from the same 2 or 3 people. Although I think I get the most insight from a guy I've mentioned 5 or 6 times now, probably, and that's Stephen Travers. His channel is Stephen Travers Art. I'll link it in the description. So I probably watch a few of his videos each week, at least at the time of this recording, and like I say, I've learned a lot. I'm incredibly grateful to the work that he does. I admire his passion and his style and all the rest of it. And, I wonder to what extent this level of exposure has or will influence my own style. I guess that wouldn't be all that terrible. I like what he does a lot, but his possible effect or influence isn't really the reason I bring it up. It's just kind of a topical example. I'm curious about how much time I should spend learning from a specific artist's methods and techniques. I try to have a diverse pool of resources, but inevitably, one just keeps coming to the fore. And if I'm honest, it's a lot easier to home in on one with one teacher than try to fracture my focus and point it in a dozen different directions. And I'm sure you can understand that. Learning bit by bit from the same person with the same techniques feels a lot more plausible, and yet the thought creeps in that maybe I'm leaning too much into it. I'd hate to ever seem, or worse, feel like I'm copying someone, or maybe eventually, way down this road, somehow stepping on their toes. So I bring this up primarily to just talk it out, as I like to do. I want to get the words out in the open so I can better understand them, but I would also really love some advice. Other resources are always appreciated, so feel free to leave some of those in the comments. But more specifically, I'm curious to know what you think about the concept. Is there a line to learning in this fashion? When I try to recontextualize it, I think about a student in a classroom learning from one teacher. But then I imagine this one teacher is giving, a vast variety of referential material. The student is exposed to hundreds of different artists with their own approaches, their own styles, meaning they maybe unconsciously gravitate to something here or something there, and becomes this very specific and individual amalgam of what they've ingested, which would be different than the student sat next to them, due to whatever they were captivated by. So, from my position, where I'm going about all this from an autodidactic position, I'm kind of the student and the teacher, at least insofar as I'm willing to seek out and offer myself these resources. But if I fail at that, if I don't know when to pivot, where to look, or why one way might suit me better than another, I run this risk that I'm talking about, that of unwittingly sliding into someone else's visual language. And my concern is that I slide far enough in that pivoting would demand this conscious, taxing reevaluation of what has come to feel natural. I don't want that to happen. I think it's important for me to just focus on learning and practicing what I can as much as I can, but I'm thinking ahead, aware of a day when I notice that I might have focused too hard on one resource and that changing lanes isn't as simple as it sounds. I guess I'm just looking out for future me, but maybe I'm also overthinking it. If you have any experience dealing with what I'm talking about, or just want to sink into the thought experiment with me, let me know what you think in the comments. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Well, big tangent there, but that's what makes this fun, at least for me. So here's the final image, and I really, really like it. I love the texture of the tower and the wall. I think the tree on the right is vague enough. I really didn't care that much about it. As you can see, there's not a lot going on there, but I think it's just enough for what's going on with the primary focus. The bushes I actually like quite a bit. There's some perspective. There's a little bit of shading to give them some shape. And then that bush on the left as well aligns with what I felt like I saw in the moment. This is a funny, probably incredibly rare experience that I don't know if I'm going to have often, but I like this drawing more than I like the image of the reference that I drew. So it's not that I like it more than the real life reference necessarily, but if I were to take a photo on this day with this light of this reference, I'm really, really content with what I've done in the drawing. And I think it adds enough, mystique or ambiguity to put you into that world a little bit more in your imagination than I think a photo could achieve. But yeah, I'm curious to know what you think. So please leave a comment down below. If you're enjoying the series, like I've said 10 billion times so far, please subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone you love. Okay. I really appreciate you for taking the time to watch this one, and I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks.